soften it. So Rainbow Jam, and then I started making films around 1964 or 65. I was able to use a 16 millimeter Bolex that was at the University of Utah when they were just starting a film department. And a 16 millimeter Bolex shoots 16 millimeter film. It had 3 lenses and it had a variable shutter, and you could rewind and then expose an image on the film and then rewind and do it again and make multiple exposures to build up something. So I was out shooting films with the 16 millimeter, and all the film that was in Rainbow Jam I created shooting with the 16 millimeter, including us projecting on an RP screen, a rear projection screen, which was actually just a big sheet that was stretched, and project with the slide projectors, and I would film those, and then we'd change the slides and play them, and I'd rewind the film. So all of it married together through these control panels, and Camden and I literally played the imagery, which was fantastic. You know, playing visual imagery is something that the artists don't get to do, and we rehearsed the imagery. All had thematic stuff. One year it was called Indian Famine. It was all Indian imagery. Another one was a binary bit, and that was all geometric. Anyway, so there were different themes that we had, and we played with a live band, or we played with different groups. We ended up, the story goes on and on, so I'm going to shorten it. But basically, we ended up in San Francisco. The Grateful Dead, when they came to Utah, and I did a poster, saw the poster and loved it, and saw the light show that we did, and they were just blown away. And so they asked, so I went down and met with Jerry Garcia the next morning, and they said, you know, if you guys ever are in the Bay Area, we'd love to work with you. And based on that conversation, I was married, and Kendon was married, and he had 2 children, actually 3 children. And we packed up and moved to San Francisco and started doing shows. And how we got started is another whole story. Rainbow Jam is a book. In any case, we ended up there and had representation, and we toured the Grateful Dead. We did shows at the Fillmore, the Avalon, the Family Dog, Winterland. So we toured with the Dead, and we ended up doing shows in Utah and Colorado. And I had all that background, and Rainbow Jam was like having a small circus, and it was a lot of work. And for a variety of reasons, we were involved in a pop festival at Lake Amador that turned into total anarchy. And it was literally a couple weeks before Lake Altamont, where the people were killed on stage the guy was killed on stage by the Hells Angels doing a concert for the Rolling Stones. And the same Hells Angels had been at the concert we had. And I'll just tell you that pop culture and those concerts started to become, they were all trying to emulate Woodstock. They became overcrowded, awful things. And the one that I think turned into total anarchy, and I won't go into that. That's part of the Rainbow Jam book. Anyway, and we started doing our own Rainbow Jam concerts in the planetarium there, in Hanson Planetarium, which was unidirectional seating with a Spitz Starball projector, which we could use. And we projected forward and really had total control of the lighting and everything. So it was really beautiful. And we started doing those concerts regularly. But we weren't making a living from Rainbow Jam anymore. And I started working at Snowbird on the construction crew building Snowbird Lodge in Utah, ski resort, and applied and ended up getting a Cole Porter Fellowship to USC, full scholarship to get my master's degree. And I accepted that, and that moved us to Los Angeles. And when I got to USC, I started my first interface with an animation camera, an Oxberry, which is a down shooter, like Disney was built on them. They're basically the standard of kind of animation cameras that were used through the 40s, 50s, to make animated films. But the camera's shooting down, and it can move up and down. The artwork underneath can go north, south, east, west, and rotate. And I put a light box down there underneath that. And on the light box, I started putting Rainbow Jam artwork, which would register, and rewinding the film in the Oxberry and doing what I was doing with the Bolex, only now with a really big camera and a great light box and not rear projection. And started to realize there was a way to paint with light on film. You can control very precisely. And I started messing with that. And then I got my master's. The story of how I got started at Abels is very interesting. I'll do a short version. I had an incredible portfolio of posters and films, and, I had a business. And I watched television one night. I said, whatever I see tonight on TV, whoever did it, the most amazing thing, whoever did it, I'm going to go apply for a job there. And it was a slit scan piece. Slit scan being the effect that people first saw in 2001 with the Stargate corridor sequence, with the streaking light moving by and all those colors. So that was slit scan. And Con Pedersen, who was at Robert Abels, was one of the inventors. He and Doug Trumbull invented that process. So he had brought that process to the Abels studio and was using it to do graphics for ABC. And so then I saw this piece, and wow. That's the highest tech and most beautiful. And I, got in touch with the Abel studio, ended up finally getting an interview with Bob. There were only 5 people at the studio at that time. The cameraman, animation cameraman, it wasn't a big place, but they were doing this beautiful work. And so I came in with my portfolio and started showing it to Bob, and my Rainbow Jam stationery came up. And he said, stop, hold it right there. And he said, where did you get that? And I said, what do you mean? It's, the poster that I made, or the stationery that I made for Rainbow Jam. And he said, well, that's incredible. And I said, why? And he said, because that is the first page in my wedding album. And when he and Kirsten got married, they had gone to San Francisco and stayed at Ray Anderson's house, who was at Holy See Light Show. And he was a collector of graphics and posters and all that. And he had collected some Rainbow Jam stationery, and it was on his desk. Bob got up the next morning, sat down at the desk, and ended up writing this love letter to Kirsten on the stationery, because it's very graphic. It's beautiful. It's a rainbow-shaped thing with clouds in the middle, so you're writing on the sky. It's really cool. And that ended up being the first page in his wedding album. So happenstance and luck, and having done a lot of work to have it there, he said, oh my God, he said, I would love to hire you. What you've done, what you do is exactly what we need here, but I don't have a lot of money right now, And I said, well, look, I'm a starving artist, so, pretty much anything work. And he offered me like $100 a week. And I said, perfect, great. And I started there, and the rest is history. Con and I locked up and created Candy Apple Neon and put together the techniques that I started to evolve, which I was inventing, all these filters and ways of creating the look of what we referred to as Candy Apple Neon. And we did the ABC graphics and and then the Bubbles commercial, the original Bubbles commercial, was like set off a whole graphic trend in advertising and marketing, throughout the world, really. And so I was there, and as a part of the studio, we hired other people, we got more cameras, and the place really started to come alive. People were calling all the time, I'd love to work there, here's my portfolio, and it was very successful. And we ended up being approached by Paramount.
Well, actually, that was it. That was getting into the next question, was like, when did Robert Abel come along? But it seemingly was happenstance, as you say.
Yeah, well, Bob's background is he went to UCLA Film School. He worked at the Saul Bass Studio. He worked maybe at Les Nobros's Graphic Films a little bit. I think that's where he initially met Con. He worked with John Whitney Sr. a little bit, who did, there was a whole trend in filmmaking in the early 60s. It was called synesthetic filmmaking. Gene Youngblood's book, Expanded Cinema. It was metamorphical, continuous film. It was not storytelling. It was visual films that were psychedelic, for the lack of a better term. And John Whitney is one of the people who is renowned for that work, some of that work. And he and Jordan Belson and Scott Bartlett, Pat O'Neill, people like that. And so Bob ended up making documentary films. He directed Band Dogs and Englishmen, Making the President, a multiple of, feature documentary films. So he was a really good editor, and he had a good eye. And so he started Abel, the studio, and got work from Harry Marks, who passed away recently. But Harry brought so much original work to the Able Studio. He brought all the ABC work and like the ABC Sunday night movie stuff that I did. He actually started the TED Talks years and years later. So anyway, Bob Able had this background in filmmaking, and but they needed a graphic designer. Con was an animator, knew all the streak and slit scan, but my thing was design, the putting different things together, and that's been what I do. I mean, I'm a director, and I always put /designer, because whether it was Tron or Star Trek, I'm involved in the design of something. I do drawings. I do hands-on, design work.
Okay, so where we are now is we're getting down to Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And the question I have is, were you able to envisage the big picture, quote unquote, from the beginning? Because this was going to be a movie of epic proportions.
Well, when we first got involved, I was saying before that I had watched the television series, and once I found out that the Able Studio was going to be involved in doing the miniature photography and the special effects, I really studied up on everything I could. I watched a few episodes from before, especially Nomad, which was one of the shows that was on television that a part of the concept of that was used in the feature. And so, again, as I said, they were well underway. They had built sets. They had cast. I don't remember who the director was at that point. There was Mike Miner involved, and Harold Michelson, and Matt Jeffers, who was working on the design and the building of a new Enterprise. And so my immediate thing was to take a look at everything that existed and see, what could be salvaged as a part of our work jumping into the thing. Now, the movie that they decided to make was a reaction to the success of Star Wars. And so when they decided to make it into a feature, the group that was working on it didn't really know the technology that had been used to do Star Wars. The new forms of photography, motion control, the detail put into the models, the compositing, the complex opticals, putting 5-6 elements together in a scene, and so forth. That kind of work had been done somewhat in the past. The one group that was involved that I ended up working with very much with was Magicam, the Magicam model shop. They were actually a subsidiary of Paramount, and they had worked on other projects for Paramount, and they had already started making some models as well. But to answer your question, the scale of it all was something that we all kind of evolved together. Again, the scale and the complexity of what we needed to do to turn it into a full theatrical feature was much more complex than what they were already working on. And so I soon realized when we got involved exactly how much work it was going to be. And, again, my first involvement with the studio was to meet all of the people who had been involved with it and to analyze the work they'd been doing and to kind of, as objectively as possible, define, what we could use and what we couldn't. And frankly, in the end, nothing they were working on would work the way it was. Just the style of it, the look of it, the model that was being built of the Enterprise. And Magicam started to build a dry dock, and they had some work. They were starting on the Space Office Complex, and they hadn't really dealt with the Vulcan ships yet or anything. So it was pretty daunting, the fact that we had to kind of really start from scratch. And, of course, they weren't happy to hear that. But being objective, again, I have to refer to the style of what the television series had been was very naive compared to, say, 2001 or Star Wars. The look of the architecture, the design of the spacecraft, the wardrobe, costuming, special effects, all those things in those movies were really refined. And that wasn't the case with where this project sat at that time. So all of us went to Magicam. That means Gene Roddenberry. And at some point along and I don't remember